Lee Van Cleef was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, a quiet town far removed from the violent worlds he would later inhabit on screen. Raised in a disciplined household, his father worked as a watchmaker, instilling in him a lifelong respect for precision, patience, and craftsmanship. These qualities would later define his acting style. During World War II, Van Cleef served in the United States Navy as a sonar operator, an experience that sharpened his calm intensity and emotional restraint. After the war, he briefly studied engineering before turning toward acting, drawn by storytelling and performance rather than equations. His early years in Hollywood were modest, marked by determination rather than glamour. Few could have predicted that this reserved man with sharp features would eventually become one of cinema's most unforgettable presences, redefining what a Western character could be. Early Hollywood struggles and typecasting. Van Cleef's entry into Hollywood was far from triumphant. He appeared in small, often uncredited roles throughout the 1950s, frequently cast as henchmen, soldiers, or outlaws whose faces lingered longer than their names. His sharp cheekbones, narrow eyes, and angular frame made him visually striking, but they also confined him to villain roles. Films like High Noon gave him brief exposure, yet little security. Casting directors admired his presence, but rarely trusted him with depth. A serious car accident and ongoing health issues further disrupted his career, forcing him into a period of uncertainty. Many actors would have faded away at this point, but Van Cleef quietly endured. He continued refining his craft, believing that meaningful work would eventually arrive. His patience during these years would later prove essential, laying the groundwork for one of the most remarkable reinventions in film history. The Sergio Leone turning point. Everything changed when Italian director Sergio Leone saw something American studios had overlooked. Leone recognized that Van Cleef's stillness carried power, and that his silence could command a frame, casting him in for a few dollars. More transformed Van Cleef from a background figure into a central force. His performance was controlled, intelligent, and emotionally restrained, offering a new kind of Western character. This collaboration reached its peak with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where Van Cleef's portrayal of Angel Eyes balanced cruelty with discipline and intelligence. He was not a caricature, but a man governed by his own ruthless logic. These films introduced audiences to morally complex westerns, where heroes and villains blurred together. Van Cleef thrived in this ambiguity, finally allowed to explore depth rather than stereotype, and his career was reborn on an international stage. Redefining the Western villain, Lee Van Cleef did more than play antagonists. He transformed them. His characters were rarely loud or impulsive. Instead, they were deliberate, observant, and emotionally guarded. In films like Death Rides a Horse and Day of Anger, he portrayed aging gunmen shaped by regret and experience rather than simple malice. These roles carried a quiet dignity that resonated deeply with audiences. Van Cleef understood that fear could be conveyed through restraint, not excess. A glance, a pause, or a subtle shift in posture often spoke louder than dialogue. His villains were not obstacles to the hero, but reflections of the same violent world. This approach elevated spaghetti westerns beyond spectacle, grounding them in character-driven storytelling. Through his performances, Van Cleef helped shift the genre toward realism and moral complexity, leaving an influence that extended far beyond Western cinema. A contrast of Western ideals. During the height of Van Cleef's success, Western cinema itself was undergoing a transformation. Traditional American Westerns emphasized clear heroes, moral certainty, and frontier idealism. European Westerns, by contrast, embraced ambiguity and consequence. Van Cleef naturally aligned with the latter. His performances reflected a world where justice was imperfect and survival demanded compromise. This artistic direction often placed him in contrast with earlier Western icons whose films celebrated simpler ideals. Rather than representing opposition between individuals, this contrast symbolized a broader evolution in storytelling. Van Cleef did not reject the past, he expanded upon it. His work suggested that the American West was not only about heroism, but also about loss, violence, and unresolved conflict. In doing so, he helped usher Westerns into a more mature cinematic era that spoke to changing global audiences. Later, career and expanding genres. By the 1970s and 1980s, Van Cleef had become a recognized name worldwide. Rather than retreating into repetition, he explored new genres. Action films like Escape from New York introduced him to younger viewers, while martial arts films such as The Octagon showcased his commanding presence without relying solely on Western tropes. Television also became an important platform, allowing him to play mentors, leaders, and authority figures. These roles highlighted his adaptability and professionalism. Though his later projects lacked the cultural impact of his Leone collaborations, they reflected his commitment to work and storytelling. Van Cleef never chased trends. He adapted with dignity. Even as his health declined, he continued working, driven not by fame, but by craft. His longevity stood as proof that authenticity could outlast changing industry fashions. Personal life and quiet resilience. Behind the intense screen persona was a deeply private man. Van Cleef married 3 times and was a devoted father, valuing family despite the demands of his profession. A well-known accident cost him part of a finger while building a playhouse for his daughter, a moment that symbolized his grounded nature. Rather than hide the injury, he incorporated it into his presence, letting life's marks become part of his authenticity. Those who worked with him described him as disciplined, reserved, and thoughtful, far removed from the violence of his characters. He avoided Hollywood excess and preferred a quiet life focused on work and family. This balance between personal restraint and on-screen intensity gave his performances added weight. He understood hardship not as spectacle, but as experience, and that understanding shaped every role he played. Legacy beyond the screen. Lee Van Cleef passed away on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64, leaving behind a body of work that continues to influence filmmakers and actors. His legacy lies not only in iconic performances, but in his ability to elevate supporting roles into unforgettable characters. He proved that presence mattered as much as dialogue, and that silence could be powerful. Modern cinema's fascination with morally complex antiheroes owes much to the groundwork he helped lay. Film scholars often cite his work as essential to understanding the evolution of genre storytelling. Audiences continue to discover his films decades later, finding them remarkably modern in tone and character. Van Cleef's career stands as a testament to perseverance, patience, and the belief that true recognition arrives when preparation meets opportunity. A lasting icon of reinvention. Lee Van Cleef's story is not one of overnight success, but of endurance and reinvention. He spent years overlooked, survived setbacks that could have ended his career, and ultimately reshaped an entire genre through quiet intensity and thoughtful performance. He showed that villains could be complex, that aging characters could carry wisdom, and that cinematic power did not require dominance, only presence. In an industry often driven by spectacle, Van Cleef offered substance. His journey reminds us that artistry is not measured by fame alone, but by influence and integrity. Today, his films remain benchmarks of character-driven cinema, and his performances continue to resonate with audiences who appreciate depth over simplicity. Lee Van Cleef was not merely part of film history. He helped write it,